One of the most common questions that I get every week in my direct messages and my emails is, Steph, I've injured my blank. How am I going to get back to lifting? How should I modify my training? And I hear you loud and clear because a decade ago, I hurt my back and it was one of the most serious injuries I had had. I was afraid, I had pain. I was confused. I didn't know what to do. And I just wanted to get back to lifting because I loved it and I still do. So I'm not an expert in this topic, which is why I have a very consistent habit of recommending people who are when you contact me. But I wanted to invite an expert on this to the podcast today so that she can give us her perspective on injury, being an athlete, strength training, how to get back to the gym, what to look for, what some of the most important factors are in returning to training, and so much more. If you've ever dealt with this or you're currently dealing with it now, I know today's podcast will help. The Listen to Your Body podcast is all about helping women who lift weights get stronger, fuel themselves without counting every bite of food, perform better in and out of the gym, and take up space. I'm strength coach, nutritional therapy practitioner, and certified intuitive eating counselor, Steph Gaudreau. This weekly show brings you discussion about building strength without obsessing about food and exercise, lifting weights, food psychology, and more. You'll learn how to eat, train, recover, listen to your body, and step into your strength. Hit subscribe on your favorite podcast app, and let's dive in. Hey there, welcome back to the podcast. Thank you so much for being here with me today to hear all about injury and recovery and being an athlete and dealing with aches and pains, and how do you get back to the thing that you love to do if you've had an injury. I've invited a very special guest today, and her name is Dr. Leada Malek. She is a doctor of physical therapy, and she has such an amazing Instagram presence and obviously works in private practice with folks who want to resume activity and are really working to rehab their injuries. She works with a wide range of people, but really specializes in athletes and dancers. And even if you don't consider yourself an athlete, which we do address in the show, I hope that you listen in to this podcast today because I find that Dr. Malek has a really interesting approach, and it's not something I've heard from a lot of people who are here to help you rehab your body and getting back to the things that you really enjoy. So I brought her on the podcast so she can be the expert, because she is, and really giving you the guidance and the sort of maybe next steps that could be useful for you. Of course, hit the subscribe button on your podcast app before you do anything else. And just a reminder that if you are looking to get your nutrition kind of dialed in for lifting and your other athletic pursuits, then I have my group program, Strength and Nutrition Unlocked, available to you. This is going to help you build muscle, get stronger, lift heavier. It's going to help you have more energy and perform better both in and out of the gym. If you've been trying to DIY this and all it's really done is made you confused and you're looking for clarity and a strategy that you can implement, then go and check out the page for Strength Nutrition Unlocked. It is at stephgaudreau.com/link. There you can see what the status of the program is. Is it currently open, or is the wait list up? Put your name on the wait list, or if it's open, come and work with me. I want to help you achieve the things that you want to do with your lifting. You can totally get there, and we can do it together. All right, let's go ahead and jump into this podcast all about injury, recovery, and lifting with Dr. Leada Malek. Hi, Leada. Welcome to the show.
Hi, Steph. Thanks for having me.
I'm so excited that you're here. We connected initially, on Instagram. We've talked multiple times on this podcast about the the beauty and the pain that is Instagram and social media. And I'm always just so delighted when I meet people virtually who I may not have met ever in my life. And we connect that way. And I love what you do and your mission for helping active people move and play better. I think that's such a great mission and obviously very aligned to what we do here on this podcast. Gosh, tell us about how you got into, being a physical therapist, but specifically, I know you've had experience working with a very specific subset of sort of athletes and people within physical therapy and treating them. So how did your journey take you to this point?
Well, I think I'll date it back to college and undergrad is when I was trying to figure things out. So like a majority of physical therapists, I studied kinesiology and neuroscience in undergrad. And then in that process, I was searching what sort of health field I would like to go into or which profession in the health field. And so I worked in the athletic training room with the athletes, which felt like home base for me because I played volleyball growing up. And the culture in the training room and the weight room is something that felt familiar to me. So I loved it in terms of helping my friends and student athletes get better in there. And then along the way, I shadowed, physician associates, nurses, chiropractors, physical therapists, athletic trainers. And it all came down to athletic training and physical therapy. They were like neck and neck for me. And then ultimately, I picked physical therapy because of the longevity I don't want to say longevity, the time you spent with the athlete. Outside of just their competition. Athletic trainers, I have the most respect for them. I think they're some of the most incredible people. And they work so hard. Like my head trainer was in at 6 and leave at 8 p.m. And I'm just like, I don't know how you do it. Mm-hmm. But that led me to physical therapy. And then once I got in and I really started to appreciate how you could use exercise to help someone continue to exercise despite their ability to not exercise was really cool to me. And I was fascinated by the human body and its ability to heal and to move and to build on itself. And sports, ultimately, I was open to everything in PT school. I loved acute care. I loved pediatrics. I liked it all. I kept an open mind, but sports ortho always felt like home base. And so ultimately I chose a clinic after graduation that was mainly sports orthopedics. And there I got an exposure I was in San Francisco, so there's really active population there from the high school athletes to the older athletes. I saw everything and everything. So lots of dancers. We worked with the dance companies in the area, lots of athletes. And that was just constant exposure to people that love to do an activity at a very high level that was competitive or at a competitive level, despite not being in competition. And then it just kind of settled me into this sports and orthopedics world, where the person is working at a higher level because they want to and they love it, or maybe they're competing. And then from there, I've just sort of evolved and continued to find work. I was lucky enough to spend time with Exos at the start of the year in San Diego, work with professional athletes, more so professional athletes, NFL and MLB, worked with dancers in the area. So I've had a whole range, but ultimately it started in the training room and now I'm here.
I love it. I always love to hear people's stories because it's sometimes a pretty winding road. Yeah. And, all of your experiences that have led you up to this point. Little known fact about me, my first major in college was physical therapy. So I did a year as a PT major. And I unfortunately had, sort of my observation hours in a setting that to me didn't really stoke my fire. And there was nobody really there to say, hey, there's other stuff.
Oh no.
And I changed my major and I moved colleges. So I didn't end up.
That can definitely happen.
Yeah. I wish I had that sort of, go into the athletic training room. And because I was an athlete in high school as well. So anyway, that's my little connection there. I think there's such an interesting experience you've had here with, you just mentioned sort of working with these high level, like even pro sports athletes, MLB, NFL, and dancers. Right. On the surface might seem like very different populations. What are some of the, I guess, commonalities or common things that you saw that these, folks performing at a high level we're dealing with despite being in what people would think are completely disparate pursuits.
Right. Gosh, I love talking about this because people always look at like a ballerina and a football player and they're like, there's no way they have to do the same thing, which their demands of their sport are very different. But at the root of things, they both need to be extremely flexible to be able to generate as much, either whether it's the dancer, their endurance to their entire routine, or through a football game, hip mobility, for example, ankle mobility, the ability to stay stable in their core while they're going forward or jumping or leaping or something. It's all, there's so much overlap. It's just a matter of who's doing it in the way that's fit for their skill. They all have competition schedules or dance schedules where they're constantly doing something for hours on end. They have to refuel. And if they don't, things happen. And it's the same across the board. And it's so funny. I actually had a friend of mine who was a professional ballerina. She was in San Diego for a little bit. I had her drop by the facility I was at. And so I had her working on, she was a post-op hip surgery. And I had her work with me down there because she was getting ready to go back to dance. And she was working on her ballet specific moves and her hip mobility and her ankle mobility and her balance and her foot control in the same gym that football players were training in. And it was so interesting to see their faces and hers. And just like, what is this sport that's in our gym right now? But each one of them was so equally surprised at what the other athlete was able to do, which is fascinating to me, and also just really motivating, because you see that each one respects another at a level that's so high up, because they understand what it takes to be able to do something like that in your craft. And so there is so much overlap between dancers and other quote unquote athletes or gymnasts. And it all comes down to the ability of the body to do something that's really freaking hard, and the need to rest and the need to eat and recover and tackle your sport again, or dance or competition, whichever it may be.
Yeah, I love that. And we were talking off air, and you were, as I always ask my guests, I know what you all do and what your universe is before we start talking. But I always ask people, hey, is there something you feel really passionate about talking about? And you said, it's really important to you to treat everyone like an athlete. And I wonder, we've already sort of touched on some of these like high level or professional athletes, like people who are getting paid to do their sport, which is not everyone. Right. And I'm wondering, for the folks listening, how do you define who an athlete is? Or how do you help people kind of self-identify in that way?
If I find that I'm working with someone who really seems to love a certain type of activity or a certain level of, you could call it exertion, but you know what I mean? Just working at a level that is in demand for an activity that is regards to physical activity or exercise. If they plan their life and their moves around being able to do something, and they love it, and they obviously need to plan around it in terms of sleep, time, schedule, I consider them an athlete in their own mind. If they self-identify not as an athlete, then I go ahead and explain, like, okay, like we don't have to look at it as if you are an athlete, but I'm still going to give you the level of detail I would give an athlete. So in those two senses, generally, if it's a huge part of their life, and that if they can't do that sport or activity, that it would take a toll on their life and their mental well-being, I would consider them an athlete in that sense.
Awesome. I appreciate that, because I know there are a lot of people who listen to this show who would agree and say, yeah, I really do love this activity or this sport that I do. It's an important part of my life and my well-being, right? To get out there, to be outside, or to be with other people, or whatever it is. And yet that word can be such a hang up for people.
True.
And keep them from self-identifying in that way. I know that one of the big things that you've talked about and kind of weaves through your work is this idea of low energy availability and how it impacts athletes, how it impacts not only their performance, but their physical body. And so I wonder if you can, tell us about, for you, how do you see this impacting the people that you work with?
Yeah, this is a really important topic to me because I feel like it doesn't get as much attention as it should. It's starting to get more, but it's still in the mix of like the glamour of getting strong and in the gym and looking a certain way, performing a certain way. The low-hanging fruit sometimes gets missed, and that's eating well, sleeping well, and taking care of your mental health. And I think when it comes to low energy availability, and that's the concept, basically just not eating enough to sustain the activities that you have to do. And when that becomes, it's basically a math equation. I should really say it's what you take in, subtract what you end up doing, the energy you expend, and then it's what's left over to take care of your normal bodily functions that help keep you alive and help keep the system flowing and working as it should. So that takes into account hormones, brain health, mental health, digestive health, everything. So the stuff you can't see that makes you a functioning human is what can get affected if you don't take the necessary steps in making sure that you refuel. And sometimes that concept gets a little bit brushed under when people are so hung up on making competition happen and sleeping to get up the next day and working to get into the next workout and constantly being on that quote unquote grind mindset and like no days off or like pushing through pain and all this stuff contributes to that mentality of, I think, not fueling enough adequately. And when that happens with my athletes, there's not only a decrease in performance, they notice they're not playing as well, they're not lifting as heavy, but other things happen too. And sometimes it's hard to tease out what caused it. Was it the lack of sleep that made them not play well? Or was it the fact they weren't eating enough that made them not sleep well? Or is it the fact that they're anxious about a game that made them not eat well? So now they're not eating well and they're not playing well and now they're not sleeping well. So there's all these different triangles and pieces to it that affect one another. And in the grand scheme of things, when we talk about energy availability, when that affects females and males, it affects both of them equally, just in different ways. And historically, the female athlete triad has gotten more of a spotlight. And I know lately they've been trying to talk about more of the athlete triad, so inclusive of males and what happens in both of them. Hormones get affected, bone health gets affected, and other areas underneath each of those. So with women, which I'll focus on just because that's where I work more, missing a period or not eating enough and then feeling anxious and then missing your period, or whether it's your bone health that starts to become an issue. And then you keep training on that. And then you find a stress reaction or a stress fracture, or maybe you have a stress fracture that doesn't seem to resolve. And then people dig into that and they realize it's because there's a low energy intake. So there's all this, it's a huge concept that is affected by so many different things. And I see that in so many different ways with the athletes, whether it's around food itself or their training schedule or anything that affects it. That's the basic overarching concept that I like to draw an awareness to.
Yeah, so important. And, we've talked on this podcast in the past about the study from 2016. It was a survey study out of New Zealand where they went into, it was some kind of recreational exercise facility. I don't know if it was like a YMCA or something similar, but they went into this setting where people, wouldn't probably self-identify as even an athlete or an elite athlete, and surveyed them and found that of the women they surveyed, almost half were at risk for low energy availability, which shocks a lot of people because to your point, what you were talking about and sort of how we define that, a lot of people would say, well, I didn't go that hard, or I'm not pushing myself that much. And, or I'm concerned about my weight. And so I'm really trying to work on, energy reduction. And it gets really muddy really fast.
Yeah. Especially when it does have to do with like a sport, if the athlete is in that, even like if it is someone who's competing, figure sports, for example, are a little bit more at risk. So dance, gymnastics, sports with weight class, that's a little bit more risky, we could say. But even in like your daily life, like even I was never at, I could have been at risk. There was a point in my life a couple of years ago where I was working just really long hours, like 4 12-hour days, very busy physical therapy clinic. I was on high stress and I had an hour and a half break, and I would work out every time I was at work for an hour. Now, what I didn't realize was I wasn't eating a huge lunch in regards to how much I was actually on my feet and working out. And then I get home, I leave at like 6 o'clock in the morning and I get back at 8:30 at night. And by the time I'd sleep, it'd probably be 10 or 11. I wasn't sleeping enough. I was working out and standing on my feet forever and working. And I was eating like a light-ish lunch with a light-ish breakfast. And I was wondering why I kept getting sick. Like, so the immune system, it may not show up in hormonal levels, or maybe it is that you just can't see it, but it can show up in mood and sleep disturbances and immune function. And then finally, I mean, fast forward 2 years, I'm like, wow, no wonder I was so beat up.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. With some of the folks that you work with, what are some of the sort of physical manifestations, maybe with pain, or you mentioned stress fractures, but is there anything else that you see that's sort of common in your athletes that you work with who are probably more in the at-risk category or are actually trending toward low energy availability?
Yeah. As a physical therapist, I think the first thing we'll see is that delayed healing of things just not responding as quickly as they should based on the level of injury or the type of inflammation or the type of pain or type of structure involved. So delayed healing is what we'll usually see the most. And other things that we pick up just by being with the patient or client or athlete for as long as we do, which is usually, for example, 2 hours a week for 8 weeks straight. So that's a lot of time. I'll pick up on mood changes, attitudes, anxiety, fear, apprehension, all these things that are affected, and that can be affected by energy intake too. So if they're not healing well, or they're not healing quickly enough, or responding to the things that they should be responding to, if they're feeling a little bit more anxious, if I can tell they're not sleeping enough or sleeping well, if they come in and they're super tired constantly or low energy, which if you spend enough time with someone, you sort of figure out their personality. And it's funny, like my athletes will figure it out with me too. Like if I'm having an off day, they'll be like, "Are you okay? What's up?" I'm fine. I can't hide it. So we know each other pretty well. And one thing I want to draw attention to is that you may not pick up on these things unless you have established that connection with your client or athlete, which is why communication is so, so important. If someone isn't taking the time to ask you the way, things that you believe in or what you like and what you dislike, what motivates you, what scares you, maybe not explicitly, but when you get to that conversation level of, oh, I know this person and I know what drives them, they won't be able to tell when things are off. And so I make a huge point into trying to establish that it's not always, I always say, like, not every question that you ask the person in front of you may be about the injury, but every question you ask should be about them and what they think and what they believe and how they view their injury or what scares them or what excites them and what they want to be able to do. Because if you have all the information, if they're having an off day and it's because of something else, you might catch something at a very early sign, at a very early stage that could save them from a further injury.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love that. I think that's so important, that person-centered, treatment in your case, or coaching if you're someone who's a coach or a trainer, or you're a nutritionist or whatever it is, an RD, like the people that you're working with are whole people, right? They might be coming to see you for one pretty specific thing, but it's probably unlikely that one thing is so isolated that nothing else in their life touches it. Absolutely. One of the common questions I get in my community is, okay, I know that lifting weights is beneficial. I know that getting stronger is important. We're not getting any younger, none of us. We know the risks that come along with things like sarcopenia, and which is muscle loss and bone loss as we get older. So it's like the logical part of the brain gets it,
right?
But a lot of people listening to this in the past have had a situation where they were lifting or doing their thing and they got hurt. And now they're really afraid that it's going to happen again, or they do start again and they get some kind of other injury and it becomes extremely frustrating, very anxiety inducing. What advice or kind of, ideas you have for folks in that position to think about if they're considering getting back to lifting or it's something they want to do?
I'm so glad you brought this up because people don't always realize that fear and anxiety and self-efficacy is the thing we talk about in physical therapy, the ability to believe you can or can't do something well or poorly, plays a huge role in actually how your brain perceives pain. Back pain, for example, non-specific low back pain, most of that, if we address your thoughts, your beliefs, and your graded exposure to you actually lifting and moving again, chances are your pain is going to resolve. And it's not as scary as it may seem. And that's not to downplay pain by any means. But the first thing I'll tell people is to pay attention to pain as if it's a signal that your body is trying to tell you something. It may not like something. It was a little bit uncomfortable. It was pushed too hard. It doesn't necessarily mean something is injured. Pain is not always a sign of grave injury. And my analogy that I always give is if you've ever gotten a paper cut or stepped on a Lego, it hurts like hell. But chances are it hasn't stabbed your foot and you aren't gushing blood anywhere. Although that obviously that can happen too, but chances are it's not that bad. And so sometimes what we feel is a protective mechanism, and your brain is letting you know, holy shit, like move away from that ASAP because I wasn't ready for it, or it's unfamiliar, or it's new. But things may not be actually be hurt. And if they are hurt, chances are they will resolve with physical therapy if you give it a shot, or if it's something more serious, there are solutions around it as well. So the first thing I would suggest is listen to pain as if it's a messenger and not as a huge alarm that signals that something is gravely hurt or screwed up or anything like that. The second thing I would suggest is fear and anxiety will only limit you more. So trying to think, it seems simple, but thinking happy thoughts is really the theme. So don't try not to be fearful of movements or anxious about movements and that it may hurt you, because it may actually play a trick on your brain in thinking that you actually can't do it, which affects how you will do it. And now you can't do it. So trying to, and if you feel like you're not ready, then having a good coach that's able to regress it for you, and you can still be successful at a similar movement at a lighter weight or a partial movement, is the way to go. Because there's no way you should be able to complete everything you want to do without the looming fear of like, oh, this is going to injure me again. Because your body is super resilient. And even though sometimes we get older and we think of this, oh, we can't build muscle enough or our bone mass is changing, just because that process, yes, it is speeding up a little bit, doesn't mean it's going to be impossible to get stronger or build strong bones again. You actually can still build strong bones and muscles despite sarcopenia and osteopenia. It just has to be the right way, at the right dosage, at the right rate, so that your body can adapt at its new sort of speed. But it doesn't mean that you can't do it. It doesn't mean you're doomed for injury ever.
I want anyone who's dealing with an injury or has had one in the past and is reluctant to go back and rewind. Is that a thing? Is rewinding a thing?
Yeah.
I don't know. I just thought about that, like rewinding the tape, but rewind this part of the interview, especially, and listen to it again, because I think that there's so much brilliance in what you just said. And it's something that a lot of people fear, is even getting treatment or going to see someone, for the fear that they're going to be told they cannot do the things that they enjoy anymore. Right. And how even that becomes a barrier to seeking treatment or seeking an assessment or working with a professional, is the fear of, well, you shouldn't lift, 5 pounds ever again. And that's devastating to people. Yeah.
I would emphasize to people viewing or to people listening in, a lot has changed over the last decade, even in the last 5 years, of the general narrative around lifting weights. And sometimes you will meet someone who has not realized it's changed, and they may tell you outdated information. And I encourage people to get multiple opinions. If you feel like the one you heard may not be the answer you feel like is right, or if the answer scared you or it made you anxious or you're uncertain, go ask someone else. There's someone out there that is dedicated to making sure you understand your body in the sense that's going to offer the way of exercising for longevity, and that doesn't hinder your progress. Squatting, knees over toes, that's a totally fine concept. And we used to think It was not fine.
Yeah.
Like how is it not fine? If it's not fine, we wouldn't be able to go downstairs. And yes, knees over toes may be uncomfortable for certain parts of people's pain cycles if they're dealing with a knee injury, of course. But we regress that and we start to progress it so that you're able to do that. If you can't do a squat, do a wall sit and then start to move into it. There's so many ways that if you can't let your knee pass your toe, stairs are going to be hard, which you probably have felt if you ever had knee pain, or going downhill is going to be hard. But it's a functional movement that we need to be able to do, at least in some capacity, for daily function. Lifting, bad for the back. Does form really matter as much as it does? It depends. It always depends. And unfortunately, that's the answer we always got in PT school. We never wanted to hear it, and we heard it every time. And now that I'm a physical therapist, it's true. It depends. And like loading the spine, is that dangerous with a back squat? I used to think it was. I used to think lifting heavy was maybe not for everyone. Everyone can lift weights. Every single person can lift weights. Not everyone needs to deadlift 400 pounds. Everyone can deadlift at least a little bit. If you're going to have to pick up a box, you're going to have to pick up a shoe, you're going to have to do something like that. And that's bending over and lifting it back up. So that motion, if someone ever tells you never to do it again, life is going to be pretty hard if you stick to that. I'm not going to lie. And if you can't get up and down from the toilet okay when you're older, that's usually a sign for further injury and a risk factor for falls and stuff like that. So, I mean, I kind of rambled on, but just make sure that what you hear, be aware that just take everything with a grain of salt, because research is evolving. It has evolved. And we're going to start to, hopefully the narrative's changing. I think it is. In my online space, it seems like it is. But I still hear from people that they were told not to do something, or they'll never be able to do a certain thing again. And PTs and really good coaches were the masterminds of baby steps. And that's all you need to be able to do what you want to do. Just baby steps and you'll get there.
I love that. I think that's so important. And, I think there's probably nothing more disempowering and fear inducing than being told that even daily movements, right, you shouldn't do, or being kind of led down the path of, okay, well, you're one move away from your knee blowing up or something. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like I just had this conversation with my dad, who's in his late 70s. And he was like, my MRI says this, my shoulder says this, like my doc said it's degenerative and it's basically, I need surgery. I have to, it's only going to get worse. On the other hand, he could push it out a little bit and work with this prehab or pre-operative stage of physical therapy to help make use of what still is available for him. He didn't know that. He just thought he was basically screwed and it was going to fall off his body for the next week or two. And I was like, no, Dad, like there are other muscles around there. And he just like didn't understand it until he finally did. And I realized it's the information that they've been told from so many years back of like what people looked at x-rays and said. He told me he talked to the doctor once and said, yeah, if this is going to happen, then you're going to die. Like he literally like said the most explicit, horrible way to say something. And of course it's going to freak someone out and stay in their mind for years on end and then affect how they approach movement later on.
Yeah.
So try, if your gut says that something didn't feel right, or in the message it was, in the way it was delivered, ask someone else, because your gut will tell you what you need to listen to.
I think that's so important. You have a wonderful, wonderful Instagram account where you share us a lot of really great information, great ideas for mobility and things like that. For, let's say, the person who's going to go in and lift a few times a week, they like to be active. How much, this is the question I get all the time, how much mobility should I be doing? And I have a feeling I know what your answer is going to be, but what are your thoughts on this? Because I think it can sort of prevent people from doing mobility because they're thinking, oh, I'm going to need an extra hour to do all this mobility before I can even lift and for it to be safe. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, that's a great question. Obviously it depends. That's first of all. Yeah. But your warm-up really shouldn't, and warm-up meaning dynamic movements and some easy mobility drills. If you're going in to lift and you're feeling pretty good, your warm-up shouldn't take more than 10 to 20 minutes tops. Like that's really all you need. You don't need an hour warm-up before you jump in. You just need a few moves that look like the moves you're going to do, that use the joints that use the joints you want to start to work in your workout, just at a lighter weight and through full movement. That's it. That's at the very basic layer of things for pre-workout, what to do. But in terms of like general health, if it depends, if you feel like you have an area that causes you pain, if you don't address it, I would stick it 15 or 20 minutes in your routine specifically for that 1 to 2 times a week. That's probably fine. Unless you're dealing with an injury that takes a little bit more attention. But generally, if things feel pretty good and you just feel like this area, for example, the thoracic spine, usually stiff on everyone, not a bad idea to get on the foam roller for 3 to 5 minutes before you jump into the squat rack. So that makes sure you get that extension through your upper back and everything else moves a little bit better. But you don't need a ton. So don't feel like you need an hour. I would go through a dynamic warm up with maybe a minute or 2 on the foam roller for certain muscle groups. Go through full body rotation and work in multi-planar movement for maybe another 5 minutes. But collectively, 15 to 20 minutes before your workout should be sufficient. Getting a cool down is stretching necessary. If it feels good for you, if you like it, go for it. You don't technically need it per se, is what the research has found. But if it makes you feel good and it makes you feel good the next day, go for it. Foam rolling afterwards, totally fine too. So there's really options of whatever makes you feel the best for your workout. And afterwards for your next day, do that. There's no certain type of recipe that's ideal for everyone, but you don't need as much as you think you need, I would suggest.
Okay, awesome. I'm always interested in having, the mobility pros, the pain experts like yourself to reinforce the things that, us strength coaches and trainers and folks who are working with people come in and ask or are apprehensive about. You have a beautiful collection of posts, on Instagram. I mean, I'm scrolling right now, like SI joint pain, quad strain rehab. Could have used that a couple months ago. I think I missed that one. Shin splints, back tension, IT band syndrome, neck pain. Like you've covered it all. So folks, I hope will go and check out what you're doing, because you give some, I love your sassy sort of alter ego that comes in your reels all the time. Brilliant. So good.
I try with that. I try when I started making this Instagram, I was like, I feel like when people come to seek physical therapy out, and this might explain why I have that sense of humor involved in the reels, is that I feel like if you're looking to see a physical therapist, you're probably dealing with something that's not letting you do the things you like to do. And chances are you're not happy about it. It's not exactly the best time of your life. Or if you're doing the preventative, it's still like a little bit stressful or anxiety inducing. So I try to make it as lighthearted as I can, because injury sucks enough already. Pain talk sucks. It's never like, while it can be enlightening, it doesn't really make you feel the best when you have to deal with an injury. So I try to keep that feeling of it could be worse. If you can't laugh at yourself, we'll get through it together. So I try to make that a point in the theme overall, because I feel like life is too serious as is, especially when it comes to injury, that if we can't smile a little bit, it's just going to make it harder. And I think it goes through my visits too. Like I'll try to use humor to help people just break the ice and just to get through the visit a little bit better if they are having a rough day.
Yeah.
But yeah, that explains that.
A smile and some laugh and some lighthearted humor never hurts, in my opinion.
Yeah. I did want to go back to the mobility thing really quick. Yeah. And if you are dealing with something that you feel is a significant limitation, if it's to the point where it's changing the way you do workout, that's a sign to dig a little bit deeper and go see it treated. Because if you do need more mobility for that region, then you should be dedicating some time during the week to treating it too. So it's not like nothing needs more than 20 minutes. If it's affecting the way you go about your day, if it's causing you stress or you're thinking about this type of pain that you are experiencing with a certain type of lift, or if it's making you change your lift or you change your form in a way that's going to put something else at risk, you should dig a little deeper. It may be a mobility issue, it may be a strength issue, but whatever it is, look into it. And I would encourage seeing a physical therapist or just to dig in and see what's going on.
Love it. All right. Well, tell us where folks can catch up with you on Instagram, obviously, but anywhere else that they can learn more from you, work with you, and all that good stuff.
Yeah, you can drop on my website. It usually has everything linked there. It's just drmalekpt.com, drmalekpt.com. Same thing as my Instagram handle, TikTok, Pinterest, whichever. Usually Facebook too. So I think Instagram is definitely the most up to date for me. So that's the best place to find me, or just email me at info@drmalekpt.com.
Wonderful. This has been so fun to have you here. I, again, appreciate your perspective, your positivity, your interest in bringing together so many of these different pieces of things that athletes and active people deal with. I think it's so refreshing, and I'm just so grateful that you were able to spend time with us.
Thank you, Steph. I really enjoyed this. Thanks for bringing me on.
Awesome. You're welcome. Thanks. I just loved this podcast episode so much. Not only do I really appreciate Dr. Malek and her approach to education and everything that she's doing on Instagram. Her reels are both entertaining and educational. She has some really fun characters as well. Go check them out. I really appreciate her as somebody who is bringing a lot of nuance and context and addressing a lot of things about injury that I don't see talked about quite as much as really should be discussed. So if you're somebody who's injured now, or you've been injured in the past and reluctant to get back to lifting, or you're just hurt now and you don't know how you're going to resume, then I hope this podcast episode with Dr. Malek was useful. Of course, you can get the podcast show notes for this episode at stephgaudreau.com. And remember to check out Strength Nutrition Unlocked. That's at stephgaudreau.com/link. And finally, hit subscribe on your podcast app. This helps to do two things. First of all, it gives you your new episodes as they come out in your app automatically. And secondarily, but also very important, it sends a signal to the podcast app that says, I really like this podcast and other people like me might like it too. It helps the listenership to grow quite organically, and it's an amazing way for me to reach new people. So thank you for helping me with that. I really appreciate it. Thanks for tuning into the podcast this week. Have an incredible week ahead. And of course, stay strong.